Hello there, and welcome to the second book of John. This book is very interesting because it also happens to be the shortest book in the Bible. Imagine that. There you go. You have some knowledge now. So, John is writing this letter to an elect or chosen, I like to say a selected lady, which is pretty interesting. Now, this lady could be figurative or could actually be a person. It's a little hard to tell, and when you read about church scholars and theologians, it's up for grabs. But hey, they argue about everything. You know what I'm saying? There's no consensus a lot of times on anything. But I thought I'd run it out there in case you run into somebody that thinks it's just figurative. There isn't actually a person. So John here is targeting two specific principles, and they are critical principles in God. One is truth, and the other is love. Remember this. Verses 1 through 4, remember, truth is a principle and truth is a person. Love is a principle and love is a person, the person of Christ. And if you lock into that and understand that and you get to, mold that over in your heart, and when you start to talk to people about truth, truth won't just be a concept. It won't just be a bunch of knowledge and a bunch of understanding, which it can be a lot of that also, granted. And it won't be just a bunch of principles. And it won't be an it. It'll be a person, Jesus Christ. And it's so critical for us to know that. Because a lot of times we want to present Christ like something instead of him, himself. Verses 1 through 4, just remember that. And so verses 5 and 6, Pastor John he's really in the process of reestablishing the principle that love for one another is a commandment from God and not optional. Did you hear that? See, a lot of people think that commandments are, the 10, suggestions, or the 100 suggestions that are in the Bible, or the thousands of suggestions that are in the Bible, because there's a lot more than 10 commandments. But he is emphatic here. He's like, hey, this is not a suggestion, okay? These principles of love for one another is actually a commandment from God, and whether we keep them or not is up to us, but they're still not optional. There are going to be conditions associated with those commandments. There are going to be consequences associated with those commandments, and there's going to be greatness associated with those commandments. There's going to be tremendous promise associated with it. So moving on in verse 7, this is an emphatic statement. Anyone coming to you who does not acknowledge that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh, they are deceivers and Antichrist Spirit. What? Well, how does that work? I mean, John is really he's laying down the hammer here and setting up the premise that there's no wiggle room here. You just can't get along. You absolutely just can't get along with people who do not agree that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. You can't just oh, well, it's okay. They're nice people. No, for his church, and whose church we are an extension of, he's emphatic. He's like, no, anyone who says he doesn't come in the flesh is a deceiver and has compelling them this Antichrist spirit. We must hear this as Christians. You see, there are in fact specific truths in God that are not optional. They're not up for bending them a little bit into more comfortable, digestible gospel. Are you hearing what I'm saying? And a lot of people in Christianity are looking for a friendly, nice Jesus that's just easy to take and easy to handle, that doesn't put commandments on our lives, that's okay with, we just love everybody and everything they say is good, let's just get along. And so the deal here is John's a great pastor and he's warning his people. And we need to warn our people of this. And you as God's disciples in the earth, we need to be people who go, hey, you know what? Let me tell you, there's some real definites in God. There's definite emphatic statements that come from us, not just so we can just be, argumentative and all that kind of stuff, but to know how to bring God to a person's life, and that is through Jesus Christ himself and no other way. That is the only way. So, moving on, you see, there are specific truths. There are no options. And we must not just present a comfortable gospel, because the gospel is so full of love, so full of hope, so full of greatness, but it also makes change in our life. And it requires us to come to that gospel, not for the gospel just to come to us and suit us and how we look and how we like to live our lives. With that, verses 8 through 11, John instructs us to guard ourselves. And to guard, by the way, specifically, the truth that God has revealed to you personally. Did you hear what I said? Not a truth that somebody taught you all the time. Not a truth that you read about and studied out and you just thought, oh, that sounds like a good instructional thing. I'm going to try to, incorporate that. No, John is actually instructing us to guard ourselves and to guard the truth that God's put in our lives personally. There's things that God speaks to us that they should be, once again, not optional in our lives. That we don't, we're not situational. We don't just change what's going on in our lives personally at the time. We are stuck on those truths, and we hold fast to those truths. By the way, there's severe delineation here. If we do not abide in the teachings of Christ, talking about, in verse 8 and 11 to 11, if we don't abide in the teaching of Christ, we do not have God. What? He's not saying, be perfect in every single thing we do, never sin. No, he's not talking that, but there's an abiding in God that must occur. And if we don't live there with God, we don't have God. That's another pretty emphatic, statement he's making. And I don't know. I mean, that's a rough one for most people to just declare and to understand. John continues to instruct how we should deal with false teachers. Once again, there's this whole thing that he's talking about here. He's talking about deceivers in these epistles. He's talking about heretics in these epistles. He says, do not receive them into your house. Now, that can be literal, and that can be figuratively speaking at the same time. You have to understand that. He's also speaking, by the way, about the house of God. The warning here is not only that you will hear something that is off, because this is what he's talking about in the scriptures here, but in fact that you'll begin to partake of the error in the form of evil actions. You hear what I'm saying? He's not just interested in that, you might get a little bit of information that has a little bit of error in it, and you might not understand something head knowledge-wise that's just perfect in our little minds. No, he's concerned about how we are going to behave in God, how actions are going to follow. As a man thinks in his heart, so he is. Our actions are going to follow how we think. And so that's what he's pointing his people to here. He's like, hey, you know what? These deceivers coming, these false prophets, these guys are just, this Antichrist Spirit. It's not here just to give you some bad information. It's here to turn your life into a place that is against God in the form of evil actions. John closes this letter with the idea that he has more to speak. Now, this is interesting, but as a good pastor, he recognized the need for some things to be done in person. That's interesting, because he understood the power and the essentiality of personal relationships. And personal relationships are more important and more essential to John. And by example, they should be both important and essential to us. Hear me. This is part of why you're in a group. This is part of why we're studying together, part of why we discuss together. Because John understood, he was talking to his church, he was talking to his people, he was talking to his friends, he was talking to his brothers in the Lord. He was not just a shepherding and pastoring, he was a person in the church, and he understood the essential component of relationship. And he's like, I have so much more, but I hope to come to you. I hope to fellowship with you. I hope to be in life with you, to share life with you and share the essential things. And so, what he's actually doing, what he's actually teaching here is that we should have that same heart, that same mind, that we want to be with our fellow believers in Christ and share relationship with them. Do life together, yeah? So as you do life together in your groups, here's a couple of things for you to discuss. Why are truth and love so inseparably connected by John? Why truth and love? And why are they not you can't be separated? Why is that important to him? Second question for you to discuss. What does not receiving someone into your house look like in practice, to you personally and to the church corporately? Oh, that's going to be a hard one. There's going to be some arguments there, but I love it. And the third one is, how do you do that? How do you not accept someone into your house? How do you do that without being an offense or a reproach to Christ and Christianity? Oh, I hope you don't blow your minds in this process. Well, maybe you might be doing yourself a favor. Anyway, go get it. Have a great time together, and God bless you.